Hey, welcome to Point Black. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I'm doing solo today, but I'm not solo, BJ. I'm doing solo today, but I'm not solo. That's interesting. My co-host is out on a special assignment, and we're going to get this thing done. You know, there's been a lot of discussion about the fact that this is the 10-year anniversary of the, you hear everything, Ferguson unrest. Some people label it as the murder of Mike Brown. Some label it as the untimely death of Michael Brown. And BJ, in some areas, I've even heard some people say the spark that lit the Black Lives Movement. So it's a lot of discussion about it. We've had. Just to go back, we've had the current chief of police for Ferguson on and had a great conversation to get an update about what policing looks like in Ferguson today versus back then. We've had attorney Carter Mayers on, and he helped negotiate the Ferguson consent decree and went on to do the same thing in Baltimore and Chicago, a few other areas. And, oh, man, we had a great in-depth conversation with him. But I think the best conversation, ladies and gentlemen, is the one we're about to have today. And I tell you why. And you've heard me say it on this show many times about civil rights and that our most greatest accomplishments in civil rights came from legislation that was subsequently enforced and backed up by the courts. Even though we always have a problem with the judicial system, but in some cases, when we got the right people doing the right thing, doing it the right way, and they are champions at it, boy, we can hit some home runs. And so while you've heard a lot of discussion about what's happened and been accomplished over the past 10 years in Ferguson, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about some home runs. And when I say home runs, I'm talking about bases loaded, out the park, Hank Aaron. I may even throw in some Babe Ruth home runs up in there, but I'm talking about some home runs. So I'm going to let my guest, we haven't said who he is, I'm going to let my guest introduce himself and who he represents. And he's then going to he and I are going to have a conversation. Let's start that way.
All right. Well, you set the bar pretty high there, didn't you?
Well, I mean.
Well, my name is Blake Strode. I'm executive director of ArchCity Defenders. And ArchCity Defenders is a holistic legal advocacy organization. And so we provide free legal services. We engage in civil rights litigation. I think we're going to talk a lot about that civil rights litigation today. And more systemic advocacy more broadly, really focused on the issues of criminalization of poverty and state violence in the St. Louis region.
I like the way you said criminalization of poverty.
Yeah.
Is that what we found in Ferguson 10 years ago when you hit the scene?
Yeah, unquestionably. So, I think that we saw a lot of things in Ferguson, but one of them was a targeting of poor and working class people, and particularly poor and working class Black folks. It's important to remember that the spark, as you said, Michael Brown's killing that began the uprising. I tend to use the word uprising, but I'm with you. Lots of people use different words. That began when he was being stopped for quote unquote manner of walking, jaywalking.
Right.
That's what started the interaction that he had with Darren Wilson.
And I think it's important that people remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That may be a detail that escape a lot of folks when we talk about this. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, all of this started was from a Black kid walking down the street.
Yeah.
And a white police officer decided that he was breaking the law and doing such. Am I getting it right?
That's right. That's right. And that's the kind of daily harassment, frankly, harassment, targeting, abuse of civilians, of citizens just trying to live and work and make their way through life, that I think is very familiar to a lot of black folks in St. Louis. I grew up in St. Louis County, and it has, in my lifetime, it's always been well known that there are certain parts of town where if you move the wrong way, drive the wrong way, go down the wrong road, it may well lead to some kind of police interaction. So I think that is that's not the whole Ferguson story, but that's a big part of it.
Right. And legally, what did you all do? How was your engagement started?
Yeah. So ArchCity Defenders was representing people in Ferguson and municipal courts around the region at the time Mike Brown was killed. So to give a little bit of history, ArchCity was first founded in 2009, really started doing more consistent work around 2012. And a lot of that work was focused on the municipal court system because there's no right to a public defender in most municipal courts in the St. Louis region. And we have, the number has changed slightly, but in all the time that we've been tracking, I've had upwards of 80 municipal courts in just St. Louis County, which is sort of an incredible detail that makes St. Louis unique. And so that leads to a lot of daily contact with police, a lot of stops, a lot of tickets, a lot of fines and fees. And so in 2012, 2013, 2014, what we saw in the St. Louis region was thousands of people every year being stopped, then ticketed, then going to court and given fines and fees that they couldn't afford to pay. And then inevitably, when they couldn't afford to pay them, would land in this cycle of jail, of getting arrested, picked up, now I'm held on a $500 bond, I pay, get out, got to come back to court again next month or else they're going to put me back in jail again. And so that problem was something that ArchCity Defenders, and this is 2014 when Mike Brown is killed, I'm going into my third year of law school, so this is my predecessors at ArchCity Defenders. What they had identified was that there's a structural problem in the municipal court system, in the system of policing, courts, and jails in St. Louis. And that was true in Ferguson, and that was true, as you said, in a number of other municipalities.
Yes, and as it relates to, because you're engaged with any number of them,
yeah,
did Ferguson happen to be worse than the other ones? I know the DOJ report honed in on Ferguson because that's where Mike Brown was killed.
Yeah.
But in reality, were they worse than the other surrounding municipalities doing the same thing, or were they all acting the same?
It was par for the course. It's a really great question because I think one of the things that happened, so ArchCity Defenders released this white paper in 2014 about the municipal court system. It basically described what I just described, and it profiled a number of different cities. One of them was Ferguson, but you saw the same thing in Berkeley, in Pine Lawn. You look at Florissant, you look at Edmondson. So all of these municipalities, you see very similar things, and in fact, worse in some ways. Ferguson was maybe middle of the pack in that particular way. That's 2014. In 2015, after so much national attention on Ferguson specifically, the Department of Justice comes in town, starts doing its investigation. There's all this talk about Ferguson. We released a second white paper in 2015 called It's Not Just Ferguson, Consolidate the Municipal Courts.
Oh, it's not just Ferguson.
It's not just Ferguson. It's never been just Ferguson. This is a St. Louis problem. This is a regional problem. And we have the data to back that up. We see it in the amount of quote unquote business that municipal courts have done in this region for a very long time. So no, it's not just Ferguson. And when we started litigating this, so I entered the scene in the fall of 2015 as ArchCity was starting to, with many partners, SLU Law Clinics, different law firms, was bringing civil rights lawsuits challenging these practices. And we ended up suing a couple dozen cities because actually this practice was happening all over the region.
And you said a couple of dozen. And ladies and gentlemen, because I thought I heard you said in St. Louis County there was like 80 different municipalities.
Yeah.
So 80 different potential mom and pop courtrooms you can find yourself in front of.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Yeah.
And dozens, and I'm assuming these dozens that you all had to litigate were primarily in North County, or were they all in North County?
They were not all in North County. So this is another thing that I think people misunderstand slightly, that they think the problem was only in North County. In a lot of ways, it was most acute in North County because that's where you find a mass of poor and working class Black people. So the racial element of this cannot be overstated. It certainly is a system that targets Black people where they are, and a lot of Black folks in North County. However, we had lawsuits that ranged from North County to Maplewood to Jefferson County to St. Charles County.
Oh, wow.
So this actually is something that was true all over the region to different degrees and in slightly varying ways.
Jefferson County.
Yeah.
Boy, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back because he just said Jefferson County. I just, boy. We'll be right back with more Important Black. Jefferson County. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. We got Blake Strode with ArchCity Defenders in the house talking about Ferguson 10 years later. And in actuality, we're talking about any number of municipalities that were acting like Ferguson 10 years ago. So how many lawsuits would you say you all have wrapped up, and were they positive or negative, or what was the outcome?
Yeah, so it's a little the numbers can be a little bit confusing because we had some lawsuits that involved multiple municipalities. So when I say we sued a couple dozen, that wasn't a couple dozen different lawsuits, but in total, we ultimately ended up collecting over $20 million across, as I said, that couple dozen municipalities from about 2015 until the last, which actually the case against Ferguson, it was a case named Fant v. Ferguson, brought by a lead plaintiff named Keely Fant, who's no longer with us. That was the last to settle just this year out of the slate of civil rights cases that we brought. So it's impacted tens of thousands of people in the region. And one of the things we did recently was release a project we call Pay or Stay. So it's a data and storytelling project that people can find online very easily. Either the bit.ly is Pay or Stay, or if you go to our website at archcitydefenders.org, you can find that. And it includes data on where we brought all of those cases, the municipalities involved. I've named a number of them: Ferguson, Florissant, Maplewood, Edmondson, St. Anne, others that I'm for Normandy. There's a couple others I'm forgetting now. But the cases that we brought and what the result of all of those were.
And the settlements look like, can you give some idea of what a normal one of those settlements look like?
Sure. So the most recent settlement against Ferguson was for $4.5 million. That was for a class of thousands of people. Jennings, which was the first large federal debtors prison lawsuit we settled, was for $4.75 million. Now, those are the two largest. There were some smaller ones, and Edmondson is a very small city, so that was hundreds of thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars. But so it ranges based on the size of the city, the number of people in the class, but large settlements.
Large. And normally those settlements provide some relief for all of the individuals who were targeted or were arrested or received tickets and paid fines and things of that nature.
Yes.
And so what impact did that have on the municipalities as relates to them changing their practices? Did they change?
So I think it's had a huge impact. I think it, in combination with a number of other things, has had a huge impact. So just to give a couple of telling stats, if we look at the numbers of municipal court revenues from 2013 to 2023 in that 10-year span, in 2013, in just St. Louis City and County, municipal court revenues were over $61 million.
Oh, wow.
In 2023, that number was less than 18 million, 17.8 million to be exact. So you have a drop in that 10-year period of about 71% in the number of revenues collected number of revenues collected from municipal courts. So, that translates. You stretch that out over a decade. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars less being extracted, mostly out of poor communities, poor Black communities in St. Louis. So to us, that's a huge deal. I will say that there's still a lot, in our view, of structural work to be done. So one thing that we've called for a decade now is wholesale consolidation of the municipal court system, because we still have, we talk about the 80-something municipalities and municipal courts. Another, to me, sort of shocking stat is in 2014, there were 81 municipal court divisions in St. Louis. In 2024, there are 85. There are more municipal court divisions.
So the number increased over a decade.
The number somehow increased, even with all of the pressure, with all of the Department of Justice investigation, the lawsuits, somehow we still have as many and more municipal court divisions. So what we sort of raised the alarm about is the ability of that structure and that institution to do harm, even though we've really been able to reduce the amount of harm that it's doing right now. The fundamentals of that system are still in place, and that to us is a big problem.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because I guess they figured that, hey, if we were able to pay the fine, the municipality, and get this lawsuit out of the way, but since there was no, and not saying that it should come from you, but since there was no pressure or effort from the legislative side, should that have came out of the state?
Absolutely.
To fix that?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that happened at the time in 2014 to 2015 into 2016, there were a lot of things that happened. Some of it was legislation. There was this bill you might have heard of called SB 5 that set a cap on municipal court revenue. So that was, that was an improvement. That was a good, positive step. There was also a Missouri Supreme Court working group that was tasked with basically figuring out what the heck is going on in municipal courts and what do we need to do about it. And that working group ultimately released a report with some recommendations to the Missouri Supreme Court. And there was a debate within that working group about consolidation. And there's a brilliant Black woman law professor at WashU named Kimberly Norwood. She was
Kimberly, know her very well.
So she was one of the people in that working group. And she wrote a dissent that made the case for consolidating the municipal court system. And that was consistent with what ArchCity had said, what this Better Together had come out and said this, the Ferguson Commission had said this. So a lot of folks at that point pushing for consolidation. Well, she was a dissenting voice on that working group that said it's appropriate, it's lawful, it's constitutional, it needs to happen. But unfortunately, the majority of that working group said, no, that's too big a structural change. We shouldn't do that. So we've been in this situation where we've chipped away even within the existing structure, and we've managed to reduce the amount of harm that it's doing day to day. But unfortunately, as I said, a lot of that structure itself is still in place.
Yeah, I'm trying to think for my listening audience, the best analogy I can come up with this is that you have a toll bridge, and you got somebody there that's illegally targeting certain people and collecting tolls, and they get sued, and they lose the lawsuit and pay up a lot of money, and they fix their toll practices in a way.
Yeah.
But the booth is still there.
Right. That's right.
And any given day, you can drive up to that booth, and whoever's in that booth can set up a sign and say, well, your toll to get across this bridge is going to be this much, and this other person's is going to be free, and vice versa. And so is there an opportunity to, say, revisit the fact that the structural change to the municipal courts in St. Louis County did not happen, and because of that, wow, there's been some victories on you guys' side that in reality, some of the very things that we were fighting against still can occur, and in some cases is occurring. And am I going too far?
No, I absolutely think it can occur and should occur. And we just, as part of that Pay or Stay project we just released a few weeks ago, we released a new municipal court white paper, so our third white paper on the municipal court system in St. Louis. And the urgent call in that white paper is, once again, calling for the consolidation of the municipal court system. Just because we haven't done it doesn't mean we can't do it, that we shouldn't do it. And there are all sorts of reasons. I mean, there are efficiency reasons. There's reasons around conflicts of interest, because, one thing we could get into is the way in which you have private attorneys that are prosecutor in this court, judge in that court, city attorney in this court, defense attorney in that court. So there's these issues around conflicts of interest. There's issues around the conflict between a court generating revenue for a municipality and the judge and all the court staff being hired by that municipality to do that job. I mean, there's all sorts of problems with the way the system is set up. And what we know fundamentally is that the criminal legal system in this country and in this region has always targeted people based on race and class, and that's still true. And so that system is still having a disproportionate impact on our most vulnerable, most marginalized residents.
So I'm assuming that based on your ongoing work in this last white paper, is the evidence clear that the structural change is a must, or or does it say, well, change can be helpful, but it's not necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, because it's clear to us. It's been clear to us for a long time, but I do think that there's a segment that looks at the reduced numbers that I talked about and the impact that all this work has had, and say, well, look, it seems like we're on the right path. Even if it took an internationally renowned uprising and a Department of Justice investigation and legislation and media and lawsuits, even if it took all of that, look, that had a positive effect. I would say two things about that. One is, if you look at just the last couple of years, one of the things we're watching very closely and are very concerned about is, and we have these graphs in that white paper I referenced that just show some of these numbers falling off a cliff, right? In a good way. The revenues and the warrants and the tickets really dropped. But just in the last couple of years, you're starting to see a little bit of plateauing and creeping back up. Some of those numbers in some of these municipalities are creeping back up. And so what does that line look like 10 years from now? We don't know yet. And there's nothing that guarantees that those numbers stay low. They could go right back up. That's one. The other thing that's important to keep our eyes on, every single year, I know you know this very well because you usually do a press conference around this time, they release the Missouri Vehicle Stops Report.
Absolutely.
Every single year, the Missouri Attorney General. And every single year it shows the same thing. You got black drivers being disproportionately stopped. Out of the ones that are stopped, they're disproportionately searched. Out of the ones that are searched, they're disproportionately arrested. And that happens even though, what's called the contraband hit rate, meaning do they find something in your car?
Right.
That's lower for black folks.
Right, absolutely.
But still stopped, searched, arrested. So we still have these underlying fundamentals, as I keep describing them, with policing in the region. That means if that system is unconstrained, it will with certainty land heaviest on black people in this region.
So what would a consolidated municipal court system look like in St. Louis County? Let's jump into that for a minute. What would that look like?
So I think there are a lot of models for it. One that's very simple because it exists already. St. Louis County actually operates for unincorporated St. Louis County. It operates its own municipal court. So there actually is a municipal court division just of St. Louis County. So you could envision some version of that, with a couple of divisions so that people can get there, that is operated by the 21st Judicial Circuit, which is St. Louis County Judicial Circuit. That's probably the easiest way to map on to what already exists that people can sort of envision. You could create something new. You could create a new branch that exists sort of outside of that county infrastructure. But, I don't think we have to overthink it. I think the key thing is to actually consolidate all of the operations, all of the enforcement, all of the staff into professional courts. Because if you've spent any time in some of these municipal courts, some of these places bear very little resemblance to an actual court. You're talking about. I know. It's you look like you're in somebody's garage. You don't know.
Or some what do you call it? Somebody's ranch house.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
And there's very little due process. There's very little formality. There's very little, what we call, quote unquote, procedural justice. So, do you know what to anticipate and how you're going to be treated?
So I'll tell you a story. I was a teenager, and I got a ticket in Hillsdale.
Mm-hmm.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to, and I wonder if it still looks like this. So I'm going to court to find,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a little building, like a little ranch-style house sitting up in there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, this is the court. Look, I'm from the city of St. Louis. We got real courts.
Yeah, right.
Walk up in there, get up in there. It's full of black people like me.
Mm-hmm.
But the strangest thing was, when they got in there, they had a phone booth, payphone on the wall in the back of the court.
Huh.
Now, you're sitting in the benches, the judge up there, but it's a payphone back there. And I'm like, this is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So they were calling people up, and they called this one young lady up, I'll never forget, and she was explaining what happened, and the judge told her, no, here's your fine, and this and that. And she said, well, she didn't have it. He told her to go back to the payphone back there and dial somebody to see if they can bring her the money. Otherwise, he's going to have her go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen anything like that in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
The judge said, well, we got a payphone back there. You can go back there and see if you can do this. And I mean, you got to understand, I ain't been a teenager in decades.
Well, that was still a very common story when I started at ArchCity. That's what I'll tell you. It is less common now. The good news is that exact story you just told is much less common now. I think you see that in the numbers. You could see that in some of the policy changes these places have adopted. That was very common a decade ago. And part of my concern, my organization's concern, is you could get back there.
Yeah,
you
I
could
can
very
see
well
that.
get back there.
Matter of fact, I can tell you how to end it. When I got up there, so I said, hey, John, I want to plead guilty, get up out of here.
Right. Yeah.
I said, but before I do, can you tell me how much my fine going to be? Because I want to make sure I had enough money with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he gave me a number. I said, I can do that. I'm guilty. Let me get the hell up out of here.
Yeah.
But it was, and when you leave out, they had to buzz you out. Now I'm done. I don't pay my fine. I get to the door, and they got a Hillsdale police officer there, and he had to buzz you to get out the courtroom. Imagine, you had to get buzzed out of the courtroom.
Yeah.
I was like, wow. Yeah. I mean, I was like 18, 19 years old then. And so I was like, wow, I've never seen this.
It's been happening a very long time. And, in a situation like that, it's clear what it is, right?
Sure.
It's clear what they're doing.
Sure.
And part of that pay or stay release, we released the white paper. We also released this shorter report we call Who Profits. And, it's just a brief kind of exploration of the question of who is actually making money out of this system.
Right.
And we talk a lot about all of the money that the municipalities themselves made out of the system. They're private members of the private bar, these judges and prosecutors and city attorneys, other folks making money out of the system. There's a compliance industry that makes money out of that system. So people that are doing the, required classes and the probation services, et cetera, they're all making money out of the system. So you really have to start, even like, jails and jail services. You have to really understand that there are embedded financial interests in keeping this system. And it really, the system as a whole acts as this giant wealth redistribution scheme where money is being stripped out of the pockets of everyday people in St. Louis and going to these varying special interests. And if you begin to understand it that way, the way that it's set up makes a lot more sense.
So, I am very excited about hearing about those white papers and what you have been able to ascertain what policing and the courts look like as relates to the very incident that kicked off the Ferguson uprising and untimely death of Michael Brown. Because again, it is a misdemeanor police stop.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure we clear. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to make sure we clear. All of this started from a misdemeanor police stop. And it turned out that those misdemeanors were being used through the court systems in Ferguson and all sort of municipalities in St. Louis County to generate a lot of money out the pockets of individuals who were stopped. And of course, the police had the right to determine who they was going to stop, because I think people don't understand. It can be 10 of us run a stop sign. The police can determine which one he wants to stop.
That's right.
And determine which one he's going to write a ticket to and which one he doesn't.
That's right.
So they have a lot of preference and choices that they can make that falls into play in all of this. So I think it's, but when you say that while the amount of money they collected has been reduced, which means less people are being impacted, but the structure is still in place.
Yeah.
And they can turn that spigot up anytime they want. That the only real solution to prevent that from happening in the future is this reorganizing of all of these municipal courts in St. Louis County. There's no other.
It's a structural change. We have to reduce the capacity of these systems to do the kind of harm that they can do. That's my basic view. So, the most obvious way that we have focused on for some time is consolidating those courts. That the goal should be to reduce the capacity of these institutions to do that kind of harm. And you're right that, you look at the tragedy of Michael Brown. You hear some of these other. We just had on the Illinois side, Sonia Massey, who was murdered by a police officer just a couple weeks ago. And those are the most extreme incidents of police violence in action, right, of state violence in action. It is not always, thankfully, it is not always the case that people are killed when they're found to be out of compliance. The much more frequent outcome are the kinds of things we're discussing. They're these low-level, low-grade harassment, targeting, arrests, bail, monetary collection. But it's on the same spectrum of what we see when people are actually killed, fatal state violence. So we have to sort of understand that there's some nexus between those.
And we're going to take another quick break. We are live in the studio, point blank, with Blake Strode, ArchCity Defenders, and we're talking about St. Louis County Municipal Court System. What a system! What a system! And we are back, and we are black. BJ, sometimes deep black. BJ. Because I'm a dark kind of guy. When I get a little sunlight, me and charcoal we can have a competition. BJ laughing, ladies and gentlemen, he laughing. He don't think I can get as black as charcoal. BJ, I've been in some sun, and I can get as black as charcoal now. And that's something to be proud of. Everybody don't have that sort of pigmentology.
Hey, right. Just don't put any armor all on you, okay?
Okay, BJ, I wouldn't expect it. You know what? I think I don't know if I like that, BJ. Wait a minute. Did he just? I ain't gonna put it on because it's a chemical base. But if you had an all natural one, I might just do it now.
There you go. Glisten.
You gonna put that on. Hey, Blake, man, it's been great talking with you.
Same.
But that's before we sort of move towards the end. How do we support ArchCity Defenders? I mean, and ladies and gentlemen, you got to go to their website. You got to pull those white papers. You got to look at those suits and those settlements, and you got to get the word out that 10 years ago, before they got involved and got on the stick and taking this stuff through the courts, that you were paying out 70, 80, $90 million coming out the pockets of poor black folk and women and children, and that number is down, extremely down. and that takes some work. So how do we support you guys?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. There are lots of ways to support the work. I'm glad you said, please do go to the website. There's a lot there, including you can find ways to volunteer with ArchCity Defenders. We're always looking for volunteers, and that can look a lot of different ways. We're a legal organization, so you don't think you have to be a lawyer. If you are a lawyer, we also love legal volunteers. But we have folks that help with everything from food delivery to event setup, all sorts of things with our clients. So please consider that. We are also a nonprofit. We take donations like any nonprofit, and we survive and operate on the basis of money that's donated to us. So if you're in a position to donate, we will gladly take that. And then one of the things that you will see on the website is we do work in partnership, and a lot of partnerships and campaigns and coalitions, because we believe that our work is most effective when it is collaborative, when it's working with other organizations, with other members of the community. And those coalitions, whether it's the People's Plan or our We the Tenants campaign, we have a Close the Workhouse campaign that is still ongoing because we're trying to get some things done at that space of the workhouse. A Defund, Re-envision, Transform campaign that's all about budgets and how we think about public safety spending. So all of those are membership-based, and you can join those campaigns, get involved, be part of those projects, because it really does take all of us.
You just hit on something. The Defund Police Program, Defund. And I know our listening audience is really going to appreciate this.
Yeah.
Because there's all sort of definitions on what defund police means. And I don't think anybody is better ample to at least give a rational understanding of what that is than you. See, I just elevated you to the defund the policeman.
No, it's okay, because I do think that we have been, that the language has been so demonized on purpose. The language has been so demonized because they don't want us to think critically. So as an organization that has anchored a Defund, Re-envision, Transform campaign along with 3 other organizations, Action St. Louis, Freedom Community Center, Forward Through Ferguson, for some years now, the basic concept that is rooted in is one that we sometimes refer to as invest, divest. We believe that we should invest in the things that make our communities whole and healthy and happy. We do town halls all over town, and we ask people what they want. And they talk about parks, and they talk about after-school programs. They talk about decent schools. They talk about jobs. They talk about fresh food, folks that are living in, food deserts. So people know what they need in their communities, and we think, let's invest in those. What do we need to divest from? We need to divest from systems that are harming us, that criminalize and punish and hurt and cage and prosecute us. Now, I get that we have all sorts of associations with these systems, but if you look at any budget, pull the city budget, county budget, your municipality, I guarantee you what you will see is the vast majority of that budget going into the carceral system, going into policing and jailing and prosecuting people, and very, very little going into all that other stuff.
And it's interesting because, ladies and gentlemen, for those who are not in St. Louis today, we are having our primary elections. And one of the ballot initiatives on there is for Kansas City, for the state to dictate that the city of Kansas City spends no more, spends 25%, increase the amount of money for policing by 25%. And I was wondering what that number was, and it came back and said, that's an extra $38 million a year.
I mean, it's a one-way ratchet. It's always more. All we ever hear is more, more, more. What have we heard about police staffing for every year I can remember? We have a shortage. Always. It's always a shortage. They never tell you how you measure what's the standard of the number you should have, but we can tell you there's a shortage. So it's a game that is played where we're always made to believe that the thing standing between stability in our communities, between where we are and stability in our communities, is more policing, is more surveillance, is more caging. And we just fundamentally don't believe that. We believe that there's a lot of room to invest in housing, in healthcare, in healthiness generally, in mental health, in child support services, youth programming. So that's where we believe resources should go. There's a huge shortage in all of those areas. And until we're fully funding those, we should not be talking about throwing more and more and more money at caging people.
you're leading this charge with ArchCity Defenders. You got involved 2015 and been involved since. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to just talk about his resume for a minute, because this is a kid, and I can call him a kid because I'm older than he is. Now, BJ is older than everybody in the room, but, ladies and gentlemen, I used to call BJ Big Papa. So BJ is older than everybody. Hey, Big Papa, you still over there?
Hey, it is Dr. Big Papa.
Oh, Dr. Big Papa. I'm sorry, Dr. Big Papa. But I just want people to know that this is a homegrown, well-educated young man that was sitting in the studio with us and doing some work. So, where were you born?
I was born in St. Louis.
St. Louis.
Yes.
Which hospital? Do you remember?
Was
you there?
I was born in Mercy. I was there.
You were there, okay.
No, I was born in St. Luke's, I think.
St. Luke's, Mercy?
My family has mostly gone to St. Luke's and Mercy. I
St. Luke's and
Mercy.
Mercy.
I was born
okay,
at.
well, some of us were born in the great Homer Phillips Hospital.
I was not born. I know
But
I was
you wasn't around then.
I wasn't, yeah.
We could reopen it up and rebirth you. So you can claim it like we do, but I guess that might not be too practical. Huh?
Yeah.
But you was born in St. Louis, and we go to where, high school?
I went to Pattonville, grew up mostly in North County, in Charlotte, Berkeley, and then Bridgeton. Graduated from Pattonville High School.
Pattonville, and you left Pattonville and went to college?
University of Arkansas. Yeah.
University of Arkansas.
Razorbacks. We talked about
Razorback.
the Hogs.
Yeah, listen, ladies and gentlemen, if you ever go down to Fayetteville, Arkansas for a Razorback football game, if you sit in the audience and you hear these weird things coming out of people's mouth, those are the fans calling the Hogs. That's what they called the Hogs in Arkansas. I got on him about that earlier, that I didn't appreciate black folks calling Hogs in Arkansas. Nah, it wasn't it was a personal preference. It was a personal preference, BJ. But I just didn't appreciate it. But and what did you do in Arkansas?
I was a tennis player, so I played tennis most of my life and played 4 years tennis at Arkansas.
So was it a tennis scholarship?
Academic scholarship.
Oh, well, you got to see, BJ. You got to show me up now. No,
I'm just trying to be accurate.
No, he won't say no, Negro. I wasn't a sports scholarship. I was there for my brain. I played tennis for exercise. You just say it, man. Act like you're in the club. Just say it. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, I stand corrected. He was not there on a sports scholarship to play tennis. He was there for his academic ability.
Yes, sir.
And you left there and went to?
Eventually, I went to Harvard Law School.
Harvard Law School.
Yes, yeah.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is a black boy from St. Louis that went to Harvard Law School. BJ, are we doing fact checks up in here? I'm gonna, Vidal, can you pull up the internet real quick? Harvard Law School.
Yes.
Congratulations, Harvard Law School.
Thank you. Yes.
Harvard Law School. But you all of that, and you're here back in St. Louis doing this type of work.
Yeah.
And that's an important piece. I'd love to just for you to talk about coming out of Harvard, what you could have done based on what you've chosen to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this many times. So I'm not just saying this because I'm on this show. I was not always planning to come back to St. Louis. In fact, for most of the time, I was not planning to come back to St. Louis. And what changed the trajectory of my life was what happened to Michael Brown and the uprising that happened here. And in that moment, I always wanted to do civil rights work. I wanted to do social justice work. But I saw people putting their bodies on the line. I saw a kind of courage in the streets of Ferguson and all over this region that made this ground zero in the fight for social justice and racial justice. And that's what made me want to come back home. And I found ArchCity Defenders in those days and learned more about the organization, and was fortunate to come back on a fellowship with ArchCity. But it is not it's not an exaggeration at all to say that Ferguson changed the course of my life, and I'm here doing this work because of what happened.
You're married, children, anything like that?
I'm married, no children.
Married, no children? Now, J.D. Vance had a the vice president nominee under Trump had something to say about
he doesn't like that.
no kids now. I mean,
I think he would find other beefs with me. He would find plenty of
you
beefs
find
with me. Yeah.
that one won't be one
yeah,
of them.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay,
it would be
now.
on a list.
Okay, well, listen, we're going to wrap this up. Ladies and gentlemen, we just had they wanted to break things down. We had some very serious conversation. We wanted to have a little fun at the end and get to know Blake a little bit better. Blake, we really do appreciate you being here. Keep up the good work. It is excellent work. It is important work, and it is work that makes the point of why Point Black needs to exist. Thank you very much.
Thank you.